Thank you, Secretary Esper, for your long history of service to the country, starting first as a young Army officer and continuing with your time here in the Congress and at the Pentagon, and now over the past 2 years as Army Secretary. Thanks for continuing to serve the country in this new capacity. I want to talk briefly about a point that Senator Blumenthal just raised, the period in your career when you were not in government, but you were in industry, specifically at Raytheon. This is obviously not without precedent. Bill Clinton Secretary of Defense William Perry did time in the private sector before serving as Secretary of Defense, as did many other notable Pentagon leaders like Frank Kendall of the Obama administration. How many years were you working these issues, starting with your time as a young cadet up until the time you left government service, did you spend before going to Raytheon?
I have spent, since departing my hometown at age 18, 37 years. Easily 25 of those have been in public service.
Dedicated to the defense of this nation?
Dedicated to the defense of the nation, advancing our national security, absolutely centered. It's been my life's work.
Thank you. How long were you at Raytheon?
6.5 years.
Okay. And I would say they have a large presence in South Arkansas, as do most major defense contractors and many other defense contractors, that Raytheon does a lot to contribute to our national security as well. I'm very proud of those Arkansans who are helping, whether they're at Raytheon or other defense contractors, putting some of the most lethal weaponry in the hands of our troops all around the world. But they are obviously a for-profit company, and they're in competition with those other companies as well. Have you fully divested from Raytheon?
I have fully divested in accordance with all my ethics obligations and requirements.
So you have no ongoing financial stake in the performance of Raytheon?
No, I don't. The only thing I have remaining, which has been listed on my financial disclosure form, is deferred compensation, which is money I earned, which is out there. But it's nothing that can be influenced, if you will.
Not contingent on Raytheon's performance, either strong or poor. Talk a little bit more about the recusal issue. It's one thing for, say, a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense to recuse himself from issues. It's another thing for the Secretary of Defense. There are certain issues of such national import that it's hard for anyone besides the Secretary to make. So could you talk through us about how your recusal from issues related to Raytheon will work?
Yes, sir. Obviously, I have a robust screening process so that anything that comes before me, either written or people appearing before me or briefings, that would be clearly flagged and screened to make sure that I remain compliant. I would remain in constant contact with our ethics personnel, and they're great career professionals who have been very helpful across the way. I also found in my time during as Secretary of the Army, and clearly with this promotion, if confirmed, be even higher, that I really dealt nearly all the time with broad policy matters, strategy, things like that. I never got into the business, if you will, of picking programs or things like that. So I'm fully confident of what my obligations are. And I guess the important thing is to say is this. I've lived an ethical life. I'm going to continue to live by those ethics, those principles, whether it involves Raytheon or any other company for that matter. So it's my commitment to the nation's security. It's my commitment to the men and women in uniform that drives me, not anything else.
I know you have, and I know that you'll continue to live that ethical example for all the men and women of the Department of Defense when you're the Secretary of Defense. I will note that although this is often perceived as an issue for both Republican and Democratic DoD officials alike, members of this committee know that in some cases there's a tendency to actually be too hard on former associates and employers because of the exact kind of perception that is sometimes raised when you leave industry and go into government. Of course, there's lots of advantages of having that kind of industry experience as well. And in my closing moments here, I want to ask you about that. This committee has prioritized opening the Pentagon up to smaller companies, not the giant defense contractors, especially when it comes to leading technology. I have to say that's been done with some limited success. How do you plan to take advantage of your private sector experience to break down those barriers to entry in the Pentagon? And how do you plan to make it an attractive place for startups and firms that don't have, very large organization with decades of experience of dealing with government contracting and acquisition at the Pentagon?
So my experience is that in many ways you find your greatest innovation, your greatest entrepreneurship is happening at the smaller levels. Those small shops, those small innovators that are out there creating incredible technologies. That's one reason why in the Army we established Army Futures Command and put it in Austin, Texas to capitalize on those folks who are coming up with the cutting-edge ideas. You know, my time at Raytheon, I spent a lot of time traveling and meeting not just with members of the company, but also their supply chain. And having that supply chain is integral. In many cases, it's fragile. We've talked today about CRs. Often the folks who pay the price of an extended CR or the cancellation of contracts or the lack of a new start are folks way at the end of the supply chain who just don't have the means to sustain themselves. So I'm very conscious, based on my time in business, of what it means to the supply chain, how you have to make sure you nurture them and make sure you have robustness, because it's the robustness that drives both innovation, but also ensures you have the competition that drives down cost and drives up performance.
Well, thanks, Secretary Esper. I guess you won't be getting a new title after the Senate votes to confirm you, but you will have a new job, and I know that you'll continue to set the example of ethical leadership that Senator Kaine praised you for and whose opinion I share.
Thank you.